first cracked the AIMS PG exam in your very first attempt during your internship. That's really like that.
One message I would like to give to all the teenagers out there who want to get into medicine is there are struggles with this field, but then every field has its own struggles. No field comes without struggles. And as far as I am concerned, I still feel like medicine is worth pursuing. So residency in India is tough.
Yeah,
It is, yes. And at the hospital, we have approximately 36 hours duty.
Hi, my name is Raya Kejriwal and I am a student in grade 10 IGCSEs. Welcome to a new episode of the Roll Call podcast where teenagers like me meet professionals to know what role is their calling. Today with us we have Dr. Priyanka Sehrawat. She is a neurologist who has practiced at AIMS and has studied at Lady Hardinge Medical College. So you're a neurologist and you have 377,000 people who follow you and who are influenced by you. Like, what has motivated you to be the person you are today?
Thank you for the question, Raya. And yes, so I am a neurologist. I am a clinician as well as a mom and a health educator, I would say, rather than an influencer. I'm not sure if I'm influencing that many people, but yes, I'm educating those people. The aim behind the social media thing was to make people more health aware because they need to be aware of the prevention rather than just cure. Cure is something very easy, which I tell my patients also, that if I'm giving you medications, taking the pills is the easy part, but making those dietary and lifestyle changes is the hard part. Doing the exercises is the hard part, and you need to do that. And that is where I thought that, okay, this social media thing can pitch in or help me reach out to more people. And that's how it all began.
So, when did you first decide that you wanted to become a doctor?
So, I think I was a very young child at that time. I was around 6 or 7 years old. And I was very impressed with my pediatrician. I was living in Pune at that time. My dad used to work with the Air Force. So he was posted there, and that pediatrician, he always knew what is wrong. His medications always worked, and he was always so polite. And he had a big clinic, which I was fascinated with, that it's such a big room, and he had it. The decorations were beautiful. So I was kind of fascinated by how doctors are and how they make others feel better. And that's where the thought process started. So I actually dreamt of becoming a doctor from a very young age. After that, whenever my teachers asked me, what do you want to be? I used to say doctor only, and sometimes astronaut, mostly doctor.
So, medicine was always your dream.
Yes.
Do you say, was your family like towards this, like you wanting to become a doctor?
So I wouldn't say that my family pushed me into this, but yes, they did support me a lot. I have an elder brother who is a cardiologist. The times that we were children in those times our parents were aware of only two options, medical and engineering. Whoever was good at maths went into engineering. Whoever was bad at maths went into the medical field. So those were the two aspirations, and my family was okay with either of those. My brother was great at maths and physics, but he still scored so well in his NEET UG, in his medical entrance exam, that he also opted being a doctor. And he was 2 years elder to me. I always wanted to be a doctor anyway, so that gave me more of confidence. So when I entered into my 9th grade, I kind of knew that this is what I'm preparing for. After my 12th, I need to get into the All India PMT entrance exam. In our time, we did not call it NEET UG. We used to call it All India PMT, a pre-medical test. So yes, that's how it all began. And my family always supported me in that. And I will, for everybody out there, for all these students out there, that overconfidence actually did not take me anywhere. I flunked in my first attempt. I could not clear my pre-medical test, All India PMT. My brother did. And I thought that because I get good grades or better grades than him throughout my grades in school, so I will definitely get into it, but I did not. And I got a really good rank in my All India EEE engineering entrance exam. My parents wanted me to take the engineering college also. They were okay with that. But when I asked them that I want to drop 1 year, they were okay with that also. They even moved their house from Bhavana to Janakpuri so that I could go to Akash Coaching Center, within walking distance. Yes, so they even shifted there. For that one drop year, I worked really hard. That was when that confidence broke, and then the new confidence built in. Right, so till 12th standard, I was very confident. I knew that, okay, I'm a school topper, I'll definitely get into it. But it's not that easy. It's difficult. It requires a different kind of discipline. So that one drop year taught me a lot of things. And that's what I want all these students to also know, that by now I have cleared 3 biggest medical entrance exams in the country. Every time I go in for an entrance exam, it's a different experience. Even if you're not able to crack it in one go, you still have many other chances to figure it out, right? So it's not necessary that you are getting above 90%, that you will get into it in first attempt. It's okay if you're not able to. You have to be more disciplined and redirect your approach towards your goal.
So, what do you like, in your opinion, how did the NEET preparation look like? Like, what was that like for you?
So, if you're talking about NEET UG, that was the All India PMT.
Yeah.
So, when I went into my drop year, when I started my coaching classes and everything, I met other students also who were again from different schools, and then they were taking coaching and from that one educational platform. I got to know their perspective also. So it was not about how much we have studied. It was about how much we have understood. So understanding physics, chemistry and bio was more important than just cramming it up. People think that medicine requires cramming. It doesn't. It also requires understanding. 50% of the paper is constituting of physics and chemistry. If you're not getting that right, you will not be able to crack your complete exam. We used to have 200 questions, out of which 100 were physics and chemistry, 100 were bio.
Yeah.
Not sure what is the pattern right now. But yes, so understanding is really important, discipline is really important, and of course avoiding your distractions. The most difficult thing the students these days are facing is distraction in the form of social media, WhatsApp, the chat, Snapchat, Instagram, LinkedIn and whatnot. So they are always on that. They are more influenced by the people on social media rather than the people near them, physically present, right? They need to take examples from people near them, who are around them, their parents, their siblings, or the professional that they meet, rather than people who are there online. Because when we post online, even if I'm posting something online, I'm not going to post my struggles all the time. 95% of it is going to be hunky-dory, and 5% of it may show my struggles, right? So you do not get a true picture when you're going through your online thing or social media. Do not get a true picture. You feel like, okay, doctors are working more. You may get to hear that from some of the doctors online, and they're not getting their worth. From others, you may get a different picture. So you end up getting confused. What I would suggest students is to take that social media out of the picture. They don't require it till they enter college. After they enter college, whichever college they enter into, then they can start using that. But till they get into there, please stay focused on the things around them, right? And that discipline is required.
So, of course, like in your time, social media and all these things did not exist. How do you suggest kids now should be able to stay more focused, considering if they already have social media? And
avoid using it. Set a timer. Set some boundaries. For example, you can watch your screen, or you can check your WhatsApp chats there are WhatsApp chats, there are important messages also from other students, from your friends, from your coaching institutes, from your parents, from your tutors. You have to see those messages or check those messages, but keep a timeline that, okay, from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. I can have my phone switched on. After that, it's my study time, it's my self-study time, and I'm going to focus on my studies rather than my mobile. You have to keep that distraction away from your room. If it is in the room, you are still distracted.
Yeah, of course.
So what I tell my students as well as my patients is, please keep your mobile away from the room if you do not want to watch it. Otherwise, you'll be tempted to see it again and again.
Do you think that there are any specific extracurricular activities that like an aspiring medical student should be doing?
So there are 2 aspects to this. Where do you want to pursue medicine? In India or abroad? If you are pursuing medicine, if you are planning to pursue medicine abroad, then you definitely need to have an extracurricular activity set, because in their forms or in their exams, they have pointers for that: musical instrument, your sports, gymnastics, yoga and everything. So they do have pointers for that. But if you are trying to apply for medicine in India, they are not asking for an extracurricular set. But in order to stay mentally active, you need to be physically healthy. So I would still suggest all these students to at least walk for 30 minutes in the morning or evening. They can take out that much of time out of 24 hours. That will keep them sane. That will also keep the anxiety at bay.
You got into Lady Hardinge Medical College, which is one of the top medical colleges in India. So, what did that actually take? Like, how did you achieve something like that?
So, getting into Lady Hardinge was a little tough because that drop year was very much full of doubts and uncertainty. I was not sure whether I'll be able to get into medical college, and if yes, whether I'll be able to get into a college in Delhi. I specifically wanted something in the state near my parents, near my family. So we live in Delhi, used to live in Delhi. But the experience at Lady Hardinge taught me many things. Till I get into Lady Hardinge, I was more of a disciplined, cramming kind of a student. But after I got into college, I got to know so many things about medicine. So biology is not at all what you think it is. When you get into medicine, you learn about human physiology, human anatomy and everything. Biology is a very small percentage of it. So once I got into Lady Hardinge, I actually became very interested in knowing how the human physiology is working and how the cells work. Once I knew the normal anatomy and physiology, then I was more inclined towards knowing about the diseases and pathogenesis also. So the time at Lady Hardinge was also very, very great. I had a group of 5 people with me. All of them are doing great right now. Somebody is a pediatric neurologist. 2 of my friends are gynecologists. Everybody is here only around Delhi. But yes, the 5 of us were very disciplined. We used to study, we used to have fun, we used to make jokes, we used to have lunch together. So the time, if you're asking me about the college time, that was great. Getting into college required a different sort of a discipline prior to the exam, and that was where the drop year pitched in. My family totally supported. The coaching institute was at walking distance, so there was no wastage of time. There was no social media. So whatever doubts we had, we used to ask our teachers, not go online to look for the answers. So going online for your answers actually leads to more wastage of time rather than just asking your teachers physically, right? So I think that's how I got there. But yes, it's a great college. I had a great time there.
So when you first cracked the AIIMS PG exam in your very first attempt during your internship, yeah, I would say that's really like rare, right?
Yes.
So how did you manage to do that?
So see, I also attempted AIIMS MBBS exam. I was not able to get into that.
Okay.
Because there were 15 general knowledge questions and I was very poor in GK. So those 15 questions were like minus 15. I attempted all were wrong, minus 15. So it was a no-no. I was always fascinated with this institute. Whenever we used to go somewhere and we used to pass in from the front of AIIMS, I used to look at the building and I used to think about it. What does it feel like to study there? And when I discussed this with my seniors at college, they were all like, no, you can't do it. No, nobody can do it. Nobody has done it, at least not with internship. And then I got more intrigued. Why can't anybody get into it? So what I thought was that I was in 3rd year at that time, that okay, my seniors are telling me that you have to drop 1 year to get into AIIMS PG. What if I start my preparation now? So I have my 3rd year, my final year and my internship year. I have 3 years. I have 3 times more years. And even if I'm coming to college or I'm coming for my duties in internship, that should be more than that 1 drop year. Whatever you can study in 1 empty year, so your 3 years should be more than that, right? That was my thought process, and I started my preparation in 3rd year. I did not think about the All India PG entrance exam at all. This AIIMS entrance exam was the sole goal then for 3 whole years. The exam date was etched in my memory. I still remember that date, 9th of November 2014, and I don't remember any other exam dates. That was the one date because it was such a long duration that I prepared for. So when I began preparing in 3rd year, I started preparation according to the AIIMS exam only. When you know the pattern of the exam and you start preparing within a given time frame, you are in a better position to crack that exam. And that's what I used to tell my friends also, that it's not necessary to have a drop year. What if we study for 3 years? What can a person do more in a drop year than what I am reading in my 3 whole years. And I did not waste any time. So internship was not that, free. At Harding, we used to have our 24-hour duties and everything. But whenever I got time, for example, I went in to check my patient's pathology reports. So I got an inner pocket in my apron in which I used to keep my notes. So I used to carry notes. So every day in the morning, I used to put few notes in my apron that today, even while on duty, I'll be finishing up these notes at least. So I did not waste any time because I knew that AIIMS can ask anything. I never asked my seniors about exam favorite questions. I just went through the previous year questions for a decade, noted down the topics, got an idea about how they frame the questions, and worked on it myself. So that discipline was required. And once I came back from the exam, I was so exhausted because those 3 hours, questions were lengthy, they were case-based, you had to think a lot. And I had given it my 3 years. So I was actually very tense in the morning when I went into the exam. And I still remember my brother took me to the exam. I still remember telling him after I came back that I can't even attempt it again. I have given it my all. If I don't get into it, I don't get into it. So I can't do more than this. This was my 100%. And when we came back and he asked me about the questions, obviously I tried recalling all my questions. My brother checked my answers and everything. And he told my mother that day only, she will get into top 50. So yes, it required a lot of hard work, but it was always the dream. And I'm really glad I worked that hard for that institute. It's really worth it.
How was your experience like when you were in AIIMS?
It's our central institute. It's a great institute. The best thing I loved about AIIMS is everything is so well organized there. For example, even the slightest of things like patient's reports. If I want to check a patient's hemoglobin urgently, and I go to the lab person and I tell him that this is the condition and I want an urgent HP for the patient, he will prioritize it. That was one. Second was the seminars and the discussions that happened. So every day we had to present a case. If you're presenting a case every day for 3 years, obviously you will have more knowledge than anybody else. That's a big difference between AIIMS and I think the other institutes. I'm not sure. See, I have done my MD and DM from AIIMS only. I have done both my residencies from AIIMS. But what I hear from my friends who have done from peripheral medical colleges, they don't get into that much of seminars or case discussions, right? So by case discussion, we mean not just rounds. After rounds, one resident had to present a whole case that this patient had this, and now on examination, these are the findings and these are my possibilities. That is something that is required to have more of knowledge. If you learn about one single case, if you're presenting a case in front of your professors, obviously you will learn more about it because you will read more about it. You will be more prepared for it, right? If you are going ahead and presenting somebody or telling something to your professor, you would want to go prepared, right? That preparation matters a lot. That preparation prepares you as a clinician also. So that is what I loved about AIIMS. That case presentation on a daily basis, because there we got to know our mistakes. We read a lot for that particular case. And of course, the quality of patients that you get there, the rare cases, rare diseases, and availability of all investigations. If I want to know the organism which is leading to my patient's diarrhea, chronic diarrhea, I can get to know about it because everything is available. If I want to get my patient's sample, for example, patient is taking some unauthorized medication or some powder or churn, and the patient presents with neuropathy like symptoms, we are not able to find any causes, is a young patient. If I want to send that sample for toxicology analysis, if there are any toxins, I can do that. I can even discuss with the senior resident in toxicology lab if I have any doubts. That matters a lot. So availability of investigations, availability of everything there, from biopsy to genetics to toxicology to whatever investigation you name, it was available there. And that's why they are able to diagnose rare diseases. This availability is not there in all medical colleges in India. It's not. I have worked at Lady Harding also. Apart from ultrasound, chest x-ray, ECG, MRI, echo, I don't think we could have done the diarrhea analysis or anything there. But at AIIMS we were, and I was really impressed with that. And that's why I also tried to study more and more, so that I have more possibilities to rule out. because I could rule out any possibility. I can send sample to any lab, right? So that is what I loved about AIIMS. So yes, it is totally worth it to prepare for it.
What do you think was like the hardest case that you've ever got? Like something that really took a lot of time and effort to figure out?
There was a patient. He was a young person from Bihar, and he had presented to OPD with hoarseness of voice for many months. And he was going to many doctors here and there, alternative medicine also, allopathy also. So he tried everything. Finally, he went to AIIMS. When he came in, we also could not find anything, so we admitted him. That okay, let's evaluate. There must be a cause. So when we evaluated that patient, we ultimately found out, after many investigations, we found out that he was having laryngeal leishmaniasis, which is an infection. It's Kala Azar. This infection is prominently seen in the Bihar belt. And this Kala Azar usually affects your organs like liver, spleen, lymph nodes. So it usually presents with fever, low number of blood cells, and increased liver size, increased spleen size. But that patient had that organism sitting here in the larynx. And we found that on the biopsy. So biopsy also needs to be seen by a good microbiologist and a pathologist to figure that out. If you suspect it, you look for it, right? Your eyes see what your mind knows. So whatever differentials we gave, even the microbiology and pathology department was so great. They used to look at it very carefully, that okay, the medicine residents are not able to find a cause. There is no tuberculosis, nothing else. There has to be something. And we found that organism. It's a rare case. We reported that case in an international journal also. So that patient was with us for approximately 25 days because that organism needs to be treated with an antifungal. The course is of a long duration. The antifungal is very costly, but we got it a sanction from the social worker at AIIMS for the patient. But yes, that was an eye-opening case.
I believe that you've also published many research papers like the one that you just spoke about. And how did you find the time to do all that during your residency?
So residency in India is tough.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. And at the hospital, we have approximately 36 hours duties. The duty hours are very long, no doubt about it. But during residency, all you need to think about is your academics, your patients, your exams. During residency, it's difficult to take care of your lifestyle or your diet, for sure. But yes, those 3 years teach you a lot about patients also. We all wish that government must do or should have done or should do something about this in the future so that the burden is less, because an overtired resident is even not good for the patient, right? We need to be sane, we need to be healthy physically and mentally, and how can we do that if we don't have the time? So I wish it's not like that, but till date it has been like that. And you eat, sleep, read and repeat that. That's all. That's how you all do it. That's how we all did it. Right, and that's how we all have been doing it right now. But we all wish that things would change somehow.
So you run Sabki Sehat, right? So in my school, I'm trying to do something quite similar to this. It's known as the MedLife movement. So basically, we get volunteers from our schools, and we have general members and then board members. So of course, I would be the founder, and then my friend Naisha would be the co-founder, and we would be sort of running this program together to basically help people like rural people who cannot afford healthcare or maybe just don't know the basics of healthcare. So our goal is to educate them and to just essentially help them with their general lifestyle. So how do you think running something like this would work? How do you think?
Yeah, so Raya, first of all, it's a great initiative. You should definitely go ahead with it, but you should know all the nuances before getting into it.
Yes, of course.
Right, there are limitations also. For example, if you are wanting to make people aware, you need to be sure how you're going to do that. Are you going to physically educate people? Are you going to be there and taking classes or workshops?
We were thinking of that, yes.
Yes. And second is the online part. Do you want to do it digitally? So my campaign is sort of constituting both.
Yeah.
So I do take lectures at government colleges for girls about adolescent health, menstrual hygiene and everything, about their mental health also. So I do health talks for awareness. And in this campaign, the most important part is YouTube and Instagram also. Those are two channels which have helped me build an audience or a community which is ready to listen. So when you are trying to get into a campaign like this or an initiative like this, you should know that people will come back and ask you for health advice. That's where you should know where are the limitations. The limitation is to educate. Even as a doctor on social media, I cannot prescribe medications. I cannot diagnose patients, right? Similarly, you also should know where does the limit stop? Till what level I can make people aware about it. They will, if you are talking about iron, people will ask you about a brand. But are you going to tell them a brand, or are you going to ask them to consult a doctor? Yes, you are going to ask them to consult somebody. That's the right way. That's how it should be. So you should know about those things before you get into this. You have to be really firm about what are the boundaries, what exactly you are making people aware of. So you want to make them aware of the general health, the role of exercise, diet, yoga, then preventive measures, then something about diseases also. Like you should tell them about iron deficiency, why they should take an iron-rich diet, B12 deficiency, why is it important to know, maternal health. When people are pregnant, why is it important to go for a gynecological checkup? The role of tetanus vaccination, the role of rabies vaccination after a dog bite or a monkey bite or a rat bite. So you should know which areas you are getting into, but never ever advise or endorse a brand. That takes away the credibility also. Plus you are also not sure, right? If you have not done something from a particular specific brand, you can't. For example, I don't endorse brands because I haven't tested all brands, right? I haven't gone to their factories and checked what exactly is the product. Did they get an FSSAI approval or not? All these oils and creams and stuff. So when you get into this, you may invite some people regarding that also.
Yeah.
So that is the second limitation you should be aware of. But yes, it's a great initiative. If you know where is the boundary, you will be doing well, right? So just be aware of what you are going to tell them about, what will be the topic, and tell them everything they should know from the general diet, lifestyle, and disease perspective.
You have currently over 1,000 posts on Instagram, right? And you are a practicing neurologist, so clearly you're very busy all the time. So when you're really, really tired one day, what keeps you motivated to keep going?
So yes, good question. Most of the burnout occurs because we get ourselves into many fields.
Yeah.
I'm still doing most of that. But yes, if you are consistent enough, if you put it into your discipline, you can do it. For example, I make sure to post at least one awareness video every day. I can miss out on few days, but I keep posting at least 25 posts or videos in a month. And all of those are related to awareness. None of those posts are about anything else or what is my life about, right? Because that is not going to benefit other people. Now, whenever I'm tired, still, see, whenever we are fatigued, we are sick, we are still eating and bathing. So if you turn something into that kind of a discipline, for example, I'm not going to miss out on my breakfast any day, right? Be it a day when I'm tired, be it a day when I'm exhausted, a day when I have fever, I'm still going to have breakfast. So I can delay making that video, but I'll make sure that I'll do that, right? So I have kind of incorporated it into my day-to-day life in a way that I can take out 5 minutes of my time. And since most of us doctors have already studied our subjects for 12 to 13 years, we don't have to research that much. We may need to research on daily topics or updates, but the basics, mechanisms, the pathophysiology, we are already aware of. So it actually doesn't take that much of a time. Yeah. And in between, I have patients at the clinic. I can take out 5 minutes and tell patients about vertigo, dizziness, what should they do about it, right? The carbide ripened mangoes, something like that. Any topic that people should know about. So that's how I usually do it.
So through your social media, has there ever been a moment where you feel it's reached out to someone that your clinic could not have reached out?
Yes, of course. See, the reach of clinic is from word of mouth. If I treat a patient, the patient gets better, he tells other people around him. But how many people are around him or can be around him? It can be the society, it can be the neighborhood, or it can be the family members. But through social media, you can reach millions of people with a single video, if that video is really, really good and helpful. What I have noticed is whenever there is a good takeaway message, that video usually has a very good reach. Whenever there is not a very good takeaway message, that doesn't work. So if you have a good takeaway message for people that they can incorporate in their daily life easily without much expenses and with ease, you can definitely have much better reach via social media as compared to your clinic.
Okay. So suppose a teenager like me was watching this podcast and they are like me very serious about committing to medicine. So what's one message you would like to give to them before they do so?
One message I would like to give to all the teenagers out there who want to get into medicine is there are struggles with this field, but then every field has its own struggles. No field comes without struggles. And as far as I am concerned, I still feel like medicine is worth pursuing. It gives you a sense of your own health, your own body. What can be more important in life than your own health? For example, I feel so privileged to be a doctor. If I wake up nauseous, I know the causes. I know what could have triggered it. I can figure it out better and even faster than anybody else, right? And that's a privilege that comes with this field. But yes, these struggles are there. But then there are some positives and some negatives with all the fields. If you want to excel into any field, you have to give your 100%, and that 100% comes with struggles and discipline. So do not shy away from that discipline. Make a routine, be disciplined. You will definitely get into whatever field you want, and you will succeed if you are able to give that 100%.
So you choose to treat patients and educate the public about health. So what is ultimately your goal for this outreach that you're trying to do?
So the goal has always been to help people along with helping myself.
Yeah.
When I teach people, I kind of reinforce that idea into my mind also. When I tell them to exercise, I make sure that I don't lose out on exercise every day. So it's not just a one-way process, it's actually working both ways. I am much healthier when I started after starting Sabki Sehat campaign as compared to prior to starting it. When I started this health awareness campaign, it was because in the OPDs at AIIMS, I was not able to tell people about the preventive methods. So when I got out of AIIMS, I wanted to tell people about this. I wanted to be able to this, and social media seemed like a feasible and an easy process to reach many people. That was the thought process. But down the line, after 3 years, so I started this in 2022 or maybe 23. Down the line in these 3 years, I have myself changed a lot, right? I myself feel more educated. I want people to be aware of their health because it's really needed in this era. People are not taking time out to exercise. They are making excuses. They're sleeping at 2 a.m. in the night, waking up with headaches, watching screen in the night, again waking up with headaches, not having a disciplined lifestyle, earning too much, but in the end, paying it with their health, right? So whatever you are earning right now, you are going to spend it in a hospital one day, a decade or 2 decades later. Because after 30 years of age, all the body processes are going to slow down. Your muscle building stops, so you need to strengthen your muscles. Your neck and back strain becomes more, so you need to start your strengthening and stretching exercises. Your heart needs you to do aerobics so that the supply is maintained. So if you're not doing this after your 25-30 years of age, then you're putting yourself in the wrong position. You're putting yourself more prone to more of neurological illnesses like Parkinson's, dementia and everything. If you're watching that much of screen in the night today, of course your attention span is going down. And what will that predispose to in the next 30 years? Dementia, something like Alzheimer's. the onset of Alzheimer's was about 65 years of age, and now we are seeing even 60, 58-year-old people with Alzheimer's. So that's the shift we are having because of the lifestyle we are having. So that's my aim, to tell people that this is the time to work on your lifestyle. The good time to work on your lifestyle is between 15 to 35, 40 years of age. After that, things kind of slow down a little faster. So if you are young, try to avoid watching screen in the night, try to have regular meal timings, try to avoid being dehydrated. So hydrate yourself properly, try to have a balanced meal. Postmenopausal females need to take care of their protein intake, their calcium intake, their stretching, their strengthening exercises, so that they do not end up having a back pain. Right, you need to incorporate at least a brisk walk in your routine so that you can prevent something like high blood pressure, high cholesterol. And that's what my aim with Sabki Sehat is.
What do you think someone who wants to be a doctor should specifically do differently in school right now compared to everyone else?
So anybody who wants to become a doctor should know that yes, it's a privilege, but it comes with a price. You need to save lives, you need to be at your toes most of the times, you need to handle emergencies, you should know the nuances of this field before you get into it. But if I can do it, you can definitely do it. And you cannot get it in writing that obviously I'll be a very good doctor, but what you can do is keep working towards it. Stay disciplined to whichever field you want to get into, and you will definitely succeed.
Thank you for your time and joining me.
Thank you so much, Raya. Thank you for inviting me here, and I had a lovely conversation with you.